"If you're going to laugh at the bride, do it now," the man at the altar said coldly, "because once she becomes my wife, no one in this room will ever laugh at her again." The cathedral fell so silent that Elena Hart could hear her own uneven breathing beneath the soft music drifting from the balcony. Nearly 200 guests had turned toward her, and not all of them bothered to hide their smirks. Elena stood at the end of the aisle in an ivory gown chosen by people who barely knew her, her full figure wrapped in satin that suddenly felt far too bright beneath the chandeliers. Just 30 minutes earlier, she had heard two women whispering near the bridal suite that Matteo DeLuca must have agreed to marry the big girl, because no beautiful woman would accept a man who could never give her children. Elena had pretended not to hear. She had spent most of her 28 years pretending cruel words did not reach her. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood outside Chicago, she had learned how easily people confused softness with weakness. Her former fiancé had left her after telling her she should be grateful anyone had wanted her at all. Her father's medical debt had swallowed what little savings her family possessed, and now, with the Hart family business weeks away from bankruptcy, Elena had been pushed into the strangest agreement imaginable: marry Matteo DeLuca, the 36-year-old Mafia boss whose name could silence restaurants, boardrooms, and back rooms across the city. Matteo was wealthy enough to buy entire blocks without checking the price. Men twice his age lowered their voices when he entered. Enemies called him heartless. Allies called him disciplined. No one called him happy. 3 years earlier, after an injury he never discussed, doctors had reportedly told him he could never father a child. The news had become an ugly rumor inside elite circles, then a weapon used by rival families who believed a man without an heir was a man with an expiration date. Matteo responded by becoming colder, quieter, and nearly impossible to read. Marriage had never interested him until his advisors insisted that a stable public alliance with Elena's family would calm investors, protect old business interests, and end months of speculation about his future. Elena understood what she was to him: a signature, a surname, a convenient wife who would never be expected to produce an heir. At least that was what everyone had told her. Yet the man waiting at the altar did not look at her like a transaction. He looked at the people laughing behind her. Matteo stood perfectly still in a black tailored suit, one hand resting at his side, his expression calm enough to be frightening. "Is there a problem?" he asked. No one answered. Elena's uncle cleared his throat and tried to smile. "Matteo, people are only nervous. Weddings make people say foolish things." Matteo's gaze moved across the front pew. Then they should learn silence. Elena stopped halfway down the aisle. She had expected arrogance from him, maybe indifference. She had not expected protection. Matteo noticed her hesitation and stepped away from the altar. A murmur moved through the cathedral as the most feared man in the room walked toward the woman everyone assumed he had settled for. He stopped several feet from Elena, giving her space instead of grabbing her hand. "You can still leave," he said quietly, his voice meant only for her. Elena blinked. "My family would lose everything." That wasn't what I asked. For the first time that day, someone had spoken to her as if her choice mattered more than the contract. Elena swallowed hard. "If I walk away, what happens to them?" Matteo's jaw tightened. "Their debt disappears either way." Her eyes widened. "Why?" He glanced toward the guests, then back at her. "Because I don't buy wives, Elena." Something inside her chest shifted. Behind them, a woman in the first row laughed softly and whispered, "How touching. At least they'll never have to worry about children." Elena's face burned. Matteo heard it. His expression did not change, but he removed his dark overcoat from the arm of a nearby chair and placed it gently around Elena's shoulders, shielding her from the cold draft coming through the cathedral doors. "Use her name with respect," he said without turning around. Then he offered Elena his hand. Not an order, an invitation. Elena looked at his palm, then at the man everyone had warned her to fear. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. Matteo's fingers closed carefully around. The first thing Elena learned about being Matteo DeLuca's wife was that silence followed him everywhere. By the time they stepped out of the cathedral, the whispers had stopped, the mocking smiles had vanished, and even the photographers waiting behind the barricades seemed to lower their voices when Matteo appeared beside her. A black Cadillac Escalade waited at the curb beneath a grey Chicago sky, surrounded by men in dark suits who scanned rooftops, intersections, and passing cars with quiet precision. Elena expected Matteo to lead her toward the vehicle without another word, but when her heel caught between two pieces of cracked pavement, his hand immediately closed around her forearm. Careful. His voice was low, almost gentle. Elena steadied herself and pulled back slightly. I'm fine. Matteo released her at once. No irritation. No attempt to control her. I know, he said. That doesn't mean I'll watch you fall. The words stayed with her during the 20-minute drive to the DeLuca estate north of the city. Elena sat beside him in the spacious back seat, still wearing his coat over her wedding dress, while downtown buildings disappeared behind them. Matteo answered 3 phone calls, each lasting less than a minute. On the second call, his expression changed. Who approved it? A pause. Cancel the agreement. Another pause. I don't care what it costs. Elena glanced toward him. Matteo ended the call and noticed. Problem? She asked. Someone at the reception sold photographs of you leaving the bridal suite. Her stomach tightened. What kind of photographs? Nothing compromising. His jaw hardened, but the captions were. Elena already knew what they probably said. The unwanted bride, the oversized replacement, the desperate woman marrying a man who could never have children. She looked out the window. You didn't have to cancel a business agreement because somebody insulted me. I didn't. Matteo adjusted his cuff. I cancelled it because the man responsible believed disrespecting my wife came without consequences. Elena turned toward him. You barely know me. Disrespect doesn't require familiarity to recognize. Before she could answer, the SUV slowed sharply. Matteo's eyes lifted toward the windshield. A delivery truck had stopped sideways near the estate entrance, blocking the road. His driver reached toward his jacket, but Elena noticed something else first. The truck's hazard lights were flashing, yet its engine exhaust was drifting heavily into the cold air. Matteo, she whispered, that truck isn't broken down. His gaze snapped to her. Why? My father ran delivery vans for 20 years. A stalled engine doesn't idle like that. Matteo leaned forward. Back up, now. The driver shifted into reverse just as the rear door of the truck opened. 2 men stepped out, not carrying packages, but cameras with long lenses. Matteo's security team moved instantly, blocking their view before anyone could reach the SUV. Elena exhaled. Paparazzi? Maybe. Matteo watched the truck disappear through the side mirror. Maybe not. 10 minutes later, they entered the DeLuca estate through a private gate. The mansion was less theatrical than Elena expected. Dark stone, tall windows, clean lines, but everything about it felt guarded. Inside, staff members waited in the foyer. One older housekeeper smiled warmly at Elena. Another employee looked her up and down before muttering just loudly enough, "So that's her." Matteo stopped walking. The entire foyer froze. Her name is Elena. The employee went pale. Matteo continued, "Anyone working in this house will use it." Elena stared at him. He had defended her at the cathedral. Now he was doing it again, when there was no audience to impress. Later that evening, Elena found him alone in the library, standing beside a window overlooking the frozen garden. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Matteo turned. "Doing what?" "Protecting me from every stupid comment." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Because you've spent too long pretending they don't hurt." Elena's breath caught. He had noticed. Before she could respond, Matteo's phone vibrated. He read the message and every trace of warmth disappeared from his face. "What is it?" Elena asked. Matteo looked at her for several seconds before answering. The truck wasn't carrying photographers. He turned the screen toward her. Security footage showed one of the men entering the cathedral earlier that morning, then disappearing down the corridor leading toward the private medical office where Matteo's old records had once been stored. And attached beneath the image was a single recovered text message. "Find the infertility file before the wife discovers the truth." Elena stared at the security image until the words beneath it blurred. "Find the infertility file before the wife discovers the truth." For several seconds, neither she nor Matteo spoke. The library felt suddenly smaller, the amber light from the fireplace throwing long shadows across the dark shelves. Matteo took the phone back and locked the screen. "You don't need to concern yourself with this." Elena looked at him sharply. "Someone broke into a medical office on our wedding day because of a file about you, and the message specifically mentions me. I think that makes it my concern." Matteo's expression hardened, but not at her. "You're right." The admission surprised her more than anger would have. He crossed to the desk, pressed a button, and within a minute a broad-shouldered man named Luca Moretti entered. Luca had been Matteo's head of security for nearly 8 years, one of the few men in Chicago trusted to stand behind the Mafia Boss without being watched. Matteo placed the phone on the desk. "Pull every camera from the cathedral. I want names, vehicles, routes, everything." Luca glanced at Elena before answering. "There may be another problem." Matteo's eyes narrowed. "Speak." Luca slid a folder across the desk. Inside were photographs taken outside Elena's father's small transportation office earlier that afternoon. A black Mercedes had been parked across the street for nearly an hour. Beside it stood a woman Elena recognized immediately, Bianca Rossi. Tall, elegant, dressed in winter white, Bianca belonged to one of Chicago's most influential crime families and had spent years appearing beside Matteo at charity galas and private dinners. Society pages had once confidently predicted they would marry. "Why is she watching my father?" Elena asked. Luca hesitated. Matteo answered for him. "Because Bianca expected to be standing beside me at the altar today." Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Was she your fiancée?" "No." Matteo's answer came immediately. "Our families discussed an alliance. I refused it." "Before or after my family approached you?" "Before." Elena studied his face, unsure why that mattered to her. Luca cleared his throat. "There's more. Mrs. DeLuca's family debt was purchased 3 weeks ago by a private holding company." Elena turned toward Matteo. "You said you cleared it." "I did." "Then who bought it before you?" Luca placed another page on the desk. The company name meant nothing to Elena, but Matteo recognized it. His entire posture changed. "Rossi Holdings." Elena's heartbeat quickened. "Bianca owns my family's debt?" "Not anymore, Matteo's, but she did." Elena suddenly remembered the last 6 months, the bank changing terms without explanation, clients cancelling contracts, her father receiving anonymous warnings to sell the company. She was pushing us toward bankruptcy. Matteo's gaze lifted to hers. "So you would become desperate enough to accept a marriage arrangement?" The realization struck Elena hard. "Why would she want me to marry you?" Before Matteo could answer, the library doors opened. Bianca Rossi walked in as if the house belonged to her. 2 security guards followed, clearly uncomfortable. "Because," Bianca said smoothly, "Elena Hart was supposed to be temporary." Matteo moved between the 2 women without hesitation. "You weren't invited." Bianca smiled. "Yet your people still let me through. You should ask yourself why." Luca immediately reached for his phone. Bianca's eyes settled on Elena. "You really don't know, do you?" Elena held her ground. "Know what?" Bianca stepped closer, but Matteo blocked her path. "Careful." His voice was almost quiet. Bianca stopped. "Still protecting everyone except yourself, Matteo." She reached into her handbag and removed a photocopied medical report. "Your husband built this marriage around one certainty, that he could never have children. No heir, no expectations, no complications. That was the bargain your family accepted." Elena looked at Matteo. His jaw tightened. Bianca placed the paper on the desk. "But that diagnosis came from St. Vincent Medical Center 3 years ago." Matteo's face went still. "Get to the point." Bianca's smile disappeared. The doctor who signed it vanished 6 months later. Elena looked down at the report, noticing a handwritten notation near the bottom. "What does that code mean?" Luca stepped closer, then froze. Matteo grabbed the page. Bianca watched him read it. "It means the test was never finalized." The silence that followed felt explosive. Elena's pulse pounded in her ears. Then why was he told he was infertile? Bianca's expression turned almost triumphant. That is exactly what someone has spent 3 years making sure he never asks. Suddenly Luca's phone rang. He answered, listened for 5 seconds and went pale. "Boss, Elena's father's office alarm just triggered." Elena rushed toward him. "Is my father there?" "No, but someone broke in." Matteo was already moving. "Lock down the estate. Get her father somewhere safe." Elena followed him into the hall. I'm coming with you. No. Matteo stopped, then saw the determination in her face. He lowered his voice. Elena, whoever is doing this may be trying to reach me through you. Then keeping me ignorant makes me easier to use. Matteo stared at her for a long second. Then he nodded once. Stay beside me. They had barely reached the front doors when Luca called after them. Matteo. He held up his phone. They found something at the office. On the screen was a photograph of Elena's father's broken desk. Across it, written in black marker, were 7 words. Ask your wife what happened at St. Vincent. Matteo slowly turned toward Elena. She looked genuinely confused, until the colour drained from her face. Because she suddenly remembered something she had never connected to him before. 3 years earlier, on the night Matteo DeLuca was admitted to St. Vincent, Elena had been working there. 3 years earlier, Elena Hart had not been wearing a wedding dress when Matteo DeLuca entered St. Vincent Medical Center. She had been wearing a blue employee badge and carrying a stack of admission forms through the emergency wing. I remember him, she whispered. Matteo stopped beneath the chandelier in the foyer, his dark eyes fixed on her. You were there? Elena nodded slowly, pieces of a forgotten night returning all at once. Back then, she had worked evening shifts as a patient records coordinator to help pay her father's mounting bills. Shortly after midnight, security had rushed a badly injured man through a private entrance. Elena never learned his name because his paperwork had been sealed almost immediately. I only saw you for a few minutes, she said. You were unconscious. Matteo said nothing, but Luca moved closer. What happened to the records? Elena pressed a hand against her forehead. A doctor brought down several test requests near the end of my shift. One form had already been signed, but the patient identification number didn't match the number in our system. Matteo's stare sharpened. What did you do? I refused to process it. Elena looked directly at him. The doctor became angry. He told me the patient was important and I should stop asking questions. A bitter laugh escaped her. People were used to assuming I wouldn't argue. I was the quiet, yet overweight girl behind the desk. They thought I'd be grateful just to keep my job. Matteo's expression darkened. But you argued. I made a copy of the original request and reported the mismatch. Luca immediately asked, to whom? Elena froze. That was the part she remembered most clearly. My supervisor, Daniel Mercer. Matteo and Luca exchanged a look. Mercer disappeared 6 months after my diagnosis, Matteo said. Elena's stomach dropped. I was fired 2 weeks after that night. Matteo stepped closer. For what reason? Unauthorized access to confidential records. They said I had opened a restricted file. Her voice tightened despite her effort to remain calm. I hadn't, but no one believed me. I spent months trying to clear my name. Matteo's eyes moved over her face as though seeing the last 3 years differently. She had not merely witnessed the beginning of his secret. She had been punished for resisting it. Before either could speak, Bianca appeared at the end of the hallway. Touching, she said. Now she finally remembers. Matteo turned so quickly that even the guards stiffened. You knew. Bianca's confident expression slipped. I knew she worked there. You bought her family's dempoured me. His voice became dangerously calm. Why? Bianca hesitated, and Elena suddenly understood. Because you wanted me inside this house. Everyone looked at her. Elena continued, You thought I still had something from St. Vincent. Bianca's silence answered for her. Matteo stepped in front of Elena. What were you looking for? Insurance, Bianca replied, against men who think power makes them untouchable. Matteo's gaze hardened. Get her out. 2 guards moved toward Bianca, but Luca's phone suddenly buzzed. He checked the message and swore under his breath. Boss, we have a breach in the East office. Matteo immediately reached for Elena's hand. Stay with me. They hurried through the corridor toward the private study. Nothing appeared disturbed except one cabinet standing open. Elena stopped in the doorway. That wasn't open earlier. Luca searched inside and pulled out a thin envelope. Matteo stared at it. His name was written across the front in faded hospital ink. This came from St. Vincent, Elena said. Matteo opened it. Inside was an original laboratory requisition dated 3 years earlier, and beneath it a photocopy carrying Elena's handwriting. Identification number does not match patient. Do not process until verified. Matteo's face went completely still. Someone had kept her warning. Someone had hidden it inside his own house. Then Luca turned over the final page. A second laboratory report was attached. Matteo read it once, then again. Elena saw his fingers tighten around the paper. What does it say? He looked at her, and for the first time since she had met him, Matteo DeLuca looked genuinely shaken. It says the injury may have reduced my chances of fathering a child, he swallowed. It never says I'm infertile. Elena's breath caught. Bianca went pale. But before anyone could question her, Matteo noticed a name printed beneath the authorization line. He looked slowly toward Luca. The room seemed to lose all sound. This report was approved by your father. Luca's face drained of colour. Matteo's oldest friend took one step backward, and Elena suddenly realized the betrayal had never come from a rival family. It had begun inside Matteo's own. Luca Moretti stared at the name on the medical report as if it belonged to a stranger. My father died 2 years ago, he said quietly. He can't explain this. Matteo's eyes remained cold. Then you will. The study seemed to tighten around them. Elena stood only a few feet behind Matteo, close enough to see the tension in his shoulders, but he never reached for a weapon or raised his voice. He did something far more unsettling. He simply waited. Luca finally looked down. My father worked security contracts for St. Vincent. He told me once that someone powerful was paying hospital staff to alter records, but he never gave me a name. Bianca laughed nervously from across the room. How convenient. Elena turned toward her. You knew enough to manipulate my family for months. Bianca's smile vanished. I was trying to expose what happened. By ruining my father? Elena asked. By forcing me into a marriage you expected to fail? For the first time since entering the DeLuca estate, Bianca had no answer. Then Luca's phone rang. He answered, listened, and immediately looked at Matteo. We have a bigger problem. Your family council is already gathering at the Grand Meridian. Someone sent copies of the infertility report to every senior member, along with a claim that your marriage is fraudulent and that you deliberately hid your inability to produce an heir. Matteo's expression barely changed. When is the vote? 40 minutes. Elena looked between them. Vote on what? Luca hesitated. Whether Matteo remains head of the DeLuca organization. Matteo turned toward Elena. You stay here. She almost laughed. Absolutely not. Elena, someone used my name, my job, my father, and my marriage to build this lie. If I stay hidden now, they win twice. His gaze softened for only a second. It may not be safe. Elena stepped closer, then stand beside me. 25 minutes later, the black Escalade stopped beneath the lights of the Grand Meridian Hotel in downtown Chicago. Inside the private ballroom, nearly 60 people waited around a long, polished table. Matteo entered first, and conversation died instantly. Elena walked beside him, not behind him. She wore the same ivory wedding dress from hours earlier, but now Matteo's dark coat covered her shoulders. Bianca and Luca followed under guard. At the head of the table stood Vittorio DeLuca, Matteo's uncle and the senior member of the family council. You should have come alone, Vittorio said. Matteo pulled out a chair for Elena before taking his own. My wife goes where I go. Vittorio's mouth tightened. Your wife is the reason we are here. Elena felt every eye turn toward her. One man whispered something about a desperate bride and a dying bloodline. Matteo rose. Say it again. The man immediately looked away. Vittorio placed a folder on the table. The council has been told that you knowingly entered a marriage that can never secure succession. If that is true, your judgment is compromised. Matteo pushed the newly discovered report across the table. Then your information is false. Murmurs spread through the room. Vittorio read the document and his face changed for half a second, just enough for Elena to notice. Matteo noticed too. You've seen that report before, Elena said. Vittorio looked at her sharply. This does not concern you. Elena stood. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. 3 years ago, someone used my employee credentials to access Matteo's medical records after I reported a mismatched test request. I was fired. My reputation was damaged. My father's business was later targeted. And now you're using the same falsified diagnosis to remove Matteo. She placed her photocopied warning beside the report. So yes, it concerns me. Matteo looked at her with something deeper than protection now, respect. Luca suddenly stepped forward. There's one way to prove who ordered the alteration. He held up his phone. My father kept encrypted backups of every security job he worked. I found one from St. Vincent. Vittorio's face went pale. You have nothing. Luca connected the phone to the ballroom screen. Grainy hospital footage appeared. A corridor, a records office, and a man handing an envelope to Elena's former supervisor, Daniel Mercer. Elena leaned forward. Matteo became perfectly still. The man on the screen turned toward the camera. It was Vittorio. Chaos erupted around the table. Several council members stood at once while Vittorio backed toward the doors. "This proves nothing," he shouted. "It proves enough," Matteo said. But Vittorio smiled suddenly and pulled out his own phone. "Does it?" He tapped the screen. Every light in the ballroom went dark. Emergency alarms began screaming through the hotel. Matteo immediately reached for Elena, pulling her close as security rushed toward them. In the darkness, a voice came through Matteo's phone from an unknown number. "Leave the hotel now, or Elena's father never makes it home tonight." Matteo's grip tightened around her hand. Elena's breath caught. Then Matteo looked toward the darkened doorway, his voice low and controlled. They just made their last mistake. Matteo did not run toward the darkened ballroom doors. He pulled Elena behind the heavy conference table, handed Luca his phone, and spoke with the same terrifying calm that had silenced the cathedral hours earlier. "Trace the call. Find her father." Elena grabbed his sleeve. "Matteo, don't trade yourself for him." He looked down at her, emergency lights flashing red across his face. "I'm not trading anything." His hand closed around hers. "I'm bringing your father home." Within minutes, Luca's security team traced the threat to an abandoned warehouse 12 miles west of downtown. But there was another surprise. Bianca stepped forward from the darkness. "I know that building." Matteo turned sharply. Bianca swallowed. "Vittorio used it for private meetings. I thought I was using him to uncover the medical conspiracy. I didn't realize he was using me to push Elena into your life so he could control the marriage and eventually remove you." Elena stared at her. "You destroyed my family because you wanted leverage." Bianca lowered her eyes. "Yes." Matteo's voice hardened. "You'll answer for that. But first, you're going to help us end this." At the warehouse, Matteo's men surrounded the property while police contacts were quietly alerted to Elena's father's location. Matteo refused to let Elena enter, but she refused to stay helpless in the car. Then she noticed something on the building's security feed. Luca had pulled onto a tablet, an old delivery entrance along the south wall. "My father's company used to service this warehouse," she said. "There's a second loading corridor behind the refrigeration units. Vittorio may not know it's still accessible." Matteo studied the floor plan. "You're sure?" "I spent summers riding deliveries with Dad. I'm sure." That information changed everything. Security entered through the hidden corridor and reached Elena's father before Vittorio's men could move him. By the time Vittorio realized what had happened, Matteo was already standing across from him beneath the warehouse lights. "You built 3 years of lies around one medical report," Matteo said. Vittorio's confidence cracked. "You needed an heir. The family needed certainty." "So you decided my life belonged to you?" Matteo asked. Vittorio glanced toward Elena. "And now you're risking everything for her?" Matteo stepped beside Elena, not in front of her this time, beside her. "No, I'm choosing what was mine to choose all along." Elena's father was brought safely outside, shaken but unharmed, while Luca handed the evidence to authorities and trusted investigators. Vittorio's conspiracy, financial manipulation, falsified records and kidnapping plot finally collapsed under its own weight. By sunrise, he had lost the influence he had spent decades protecting. Bianca agreed to testify about the debt scheme and surrendered control of the holding company she had used against Elena's family. But the moment Elena remembered most came later, back at the DeLuca estate, when the noise was finally gone. She stood near the bedroom window, still wearing Matteo's coat over her wrinkled wedding dress. "You could have lost your position tonight," she whispered. Matteo approached slowly. "I almost lost something more important 3 years ago without even knowing it." Elena looked at him. "What?" "The chance to know the woman who tried to protect a stranger's medical record when everyone else was being paid to look away." Her eyes filled. Matteo lifted a hand but stopped before touching her cheek. "May I?" Elena nodded. He gently wiped away one tear. You never needed to become smaller for people to respect you, Elena. His voice softened. They needed to become better people. For the first time in years, she did not look away when someone called her worthy. Months passed. Elena's father rebuilt his company, and Elena began working with a patient advocacy organization, helping employees report medical misconduct without risking their livelihoods. Matteo remained feared in his world, but inside their home, Elena discovered the quieter man beneath the reputation. The man who remembered how she took her coffee, who never let anyone speak over her, and who asked instead of ordered when the answer belonged to her. Their marriage slowly stopped feeling like an arrangement. Then one spring morning, Elena rushed away from breakfast with a hand over her mouth. Matteo followed, alarmed. "Elena?" She stared at him from the bathroom doorway, pale and stunned. 2 days later, a doctor placed the results between them and smiled. Pregnant. Matteo said nothing. Elena laughed through sudden tears. "You're supposed to say something." The feared Mafia boss, who could command an entire room, simply sank into the chair beside her and covered his face for 1 second. Then he looked up, eyes shining. "Are you okay?" It was the first question he asked, not whether it was possible, not whether the baby was an heir. Elena nodded. Matteo knelt beside her, rested his forehead against her hand, and whispered, "Then that's all I needed to know." When the news reached the family, the people who had once whispered about Elena's body and Matteo's supposed infertility were left speechless. But Elena no longer cared about shocking them. She had learned something far more important. She had never been difficult to love. She had simply spent too long around people who did not know how to see her. And Matteo, the man everyone believed incapable of giving her a future, had given her something greater than protection. Respect, choice, and a home where she never had to apologize for taking up space. Their story had begun with a forced marriage built on a lie, but it ended with 2 wounded people choosing each other freely. And maybe that is the real question. If everyone around you insisted someone was unworthy of love, would you believe the crowd? Or would you have the courage to see what they missed? If you enjoyed Elena and Matteo's story, subscribe to the channel for more emotional Mafia Boss stories about unexpected love, protection, healing, and the people the world underestimated.